Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 502, The Spiritual Disease of Ignorance, Part 2, an intro to disregard, the fundamental degree of ignorance. The podcast objectives are analyze the danger of rejecting the truth, reveal the fundamental degree of ignorance, analyze the two models of disregard, and analyze the relationship between ignorance and prejudice. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcasts or videos for the first time. We trust you are led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us, for these are troubling times and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. An infection beyond your detection. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 428 of our exposition of lawlessness. Recently, we began analyzing the spiritual disease of ignorance at a more detailed level, and we came to the conclusion that ignorance is not bliss. We know this because there is no excuse for ignorance. For look, listen, it has been written, ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it shall be opened. Look again, my friend, and listen. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of Elohim, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it shall be given to him. But he should ask in faith, not doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. And thus we conclude, all who lack wisdom and knowledge will surely be destroyed, for they are without excuse. To their great misfortune, their lack of wisdom is a result of willful ignorance, which, when it is finished, leads to a full rejection of the truth. Here lies the problem, and it is such an immense problem that I will offer it to you as a revelation. This is one I advise you to bookmark and to share. Rejecting the truth is one of the worst things you could ever do. For when you reject the truth, you are infected with spiritual blindness. Not only this, but these cases of spiritual blindness are the most intense cases and they set in faster than all the others. Now, I trust I have gotten your attention with this crucial matter, and I trust you recall that rejection is one of the 16 deadliest degrees of lawlessness. And I hope you can see how the path that leads men to rejecting the truth begins with ignorance. For, as I said before, Satan's master plan is to deceive you into rejecting the truth without appreciating that you are rejecting the truth. And should he succeed, it won't matter that you were deceived. The spiritual blindness you will incur will be one of the worst cases you could ever receive. And if you don't believe anything about ignorance, this is a matter you must believe. Therefore, it is imperative for us to complete a deep dive into the spiritual disease of ignorance. Trust me, if you don't gain the victory over this degree of lawlessness, you will be fully infected with the spirit of rejection. Not only this, but as your mind is saturated with deception, your infection will be beyond your detection. And so, if you are ready, let's get started. He will never reveal his will to you. Now, first things first, and as I told you aforetime, we have transitioned into a new phase in our quest for holiness. Ergo, our wars with the degrees of lawlessness adjacent to wisdom and knowledge will be different than our wars with disobedience, doubt, prejudice, and contempt. And yet, I do have good news vis-a-vis all the degrees of lawlessness have the same makeup. To wit, they consist of 3 degrees, i.e., 3 spiritual viruses. And if you are infected with these viruses, you are subjected to the full force of the spiritual disease. Along these lines, the first spiritual virus you will encounter is the fundamental degree of ignorance. Ergo, if you can resist this degree of lawlessness, you can stop the spiritual disease of ignorance before it spreads. And that degree is disregard. Now, at first glance, many will fail to consider how disregard is an extremely formidable foe. And thus, we should consider a definition of disregard to see how it is designed to set the deadly course of ignorance into motion. By definition, to disregard is to pay no attention to leave out of consideration, to ignore, to treat someone or something as unworthy of due regard, care, respect, or notice, to slight. Now, if you consider this definition carefully, the great danger of disregard should be quite clear. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. When you operate in the spirit of disregard, the someone you are disregarding is Yahuwah Elohim, and the something you are disregarding is his will. Here lies the problem. To wit, if you disregard Elohim and or his will, he will never reveal his will to you. For those who disregard the Father or his will are clearly operating in every degree of prejudice, to wit, immorality, irreverence, and blasphemy. Remember, to disregard is to treat someone or something as unworthy of due respect. And the only way you could take this action is if you are infected with prejudice and you have elevated yourself or someone else above Elohim. active disregard, the passive disregard. Now, these things being what they surely are, we can clearly see the immense danger of disregard. To wit, disregard closes the door on knowledge in a very dangerous way. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. When you operate in disregard, you are figuratively slamming the door in the face of our Creator under the premise that He is not worthy of your time and attention. Look, look here. This is the element of disregard that many fail to consider. And these are the same people who do not appreciate how actions speak louder than words. Along these lines, many within the dying nation of Israel are not actively walking in the spirit of disregard. Quite the contrary, they are passively walking in the spirit of disregard. To wit, they are not disregarding Elohim completely or as an entity. Rather, they are disregarding his order, his hierarchy, and other aspects of his divine will. Here lies the deception. To wit, these hypocrites are choosing the parts of Yahuwah's will they desire to regard and to follow, and they are disregarding the parts they don't want to follow. And yet, because they have actively regarded some fraction of Yahuwah's will, they assume their passive disregard of the remaining fraction has no consequences. What foolishness! Do you think Elohim is mocked? Do you suppose he is not aware of the fraction you left out? My dear friends, let me tell you something. All who actively and or passively disregard the will of Elohim are actively and or passively mocking Elohim. For look, listen, it has been written, be not deceived. Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. Ergo, if you sow a fraction of Yahuwah's will, you will reap total damnation and dejection. For any manner of disregard constitutes a full rejection. Deal with it. Now, this speaks to the all or nothing nature of our quest, which I have addressed since the very beginning. And I have been very outspoken concerning the perils of lawlessness. And in case you were not here in the beginning, I implore you to hear me carefully as I say, if you are operating in any of the degrees you see in the image to the right, you will not be sealed and you will not be saved. And this, my friends, is why disregard is one of the deadliest degrees of lawlessness. It is because disregard is the fundamental reason why the majority within this nation are ignorant of these matters. Ergo, disregard, whether passive or active, is the fundamental reason why the majority within this nation are rejecting the truth. It is because they are ignoring all the spiritual factors that are blinding them to the truth. The link between ignorance and prejudice. Now, there is a complex relationship between passive and active disregard that makes your victory over this foul spirit extremely complicated. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. Your passive disregard of the will of Elohim will always lead to an active disregard, which puts you on a fast track to rejection. For that reason, we should consider the most common manner in which passive disregard evolves into active disregard. That is, when men and women refuse to stand for righteousness and call out the sin in their midst. Now, first of all, this is not a foreign topic to anyone who has been following this ministry. And the truth is, my unwillingness to engage in passive disregard is the reason why Yahuwah called me to launch this ministry. It is for the following reason, which I will offer as an inflection point. This is one I advise you to bookmark and to share as you are led. When you refuse to stand for righteousness and call out the sin in your midst, you are actively disregarding the will of Elohim. Now, that was the inflection. Here lies the complexity and the problem. Vis-a-vis, anyone who fails to call out the sin in their midst is already acting in passive disregard. To it, they've already been infected with ignorance. We know this because you will only engage in passive disregard in those situations when you are operating in the spirit of prejudice. In effect, you are willing to ignore the sins of men and women who you regard as higher than Elohim. Here again, this is the highest level of blasphemy, i.e., the critical degree of prejudice. And we can prove this matter using the mountain of lawlessness, which you see to the right. My dear friends, consider the image to the right and tell me, what degree of lawlessness does ignorance feed into? Feel free to pause the video and look at the bottom 1/3 of the mountain of lawlessness. Exactly. Ignorance feeds into prejudice. And thus, we conclude, when you operate in prejudice and you ignore the sins of men and women you regard higher than Elohim, this is prime evidence that you have been infected with passive disregard, which is leading you to actively disregarding the command to stand for righteousness and to call out sin in your midst on every occasion. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, there is no denying the relationship between ignorance and prejudice. We see it clearly and almost every day in our secular world. And yet, due to the spirit of deception that is hard at work, many are disregarding it within our spiritual discourse. And yet, seeing how this troubling development is at the root of all the problems that are dividing and thus destroying our nation, Yahuwah has called me to address it head on and with finality and with the power and the authority of his spirit. Ergo, we will table this discussion for now, and we will pick it back up in 2 days. In 2 days, my friends, I shall, by the Ruach of Elohim, reveal the truth and the great danger of the spirit of disregard. For all who have gone down this path have been infected with the worst cases of spiritual blindness. And if they ever saw the light, they will never see it again. And thus, this is a podcast you cannot afford to miss. In 2 days, Yahuwah bless you until then. Now, here is the final word. And turning leaves, what wouldst I find? The blind do often lead the blind. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, there are more than 100 ways you can be infected with spiritual blindness. And we have already found the deadliest infection of them all. Not only this, but we have also found the deceptive first step onto this deadly path. Enter passive disregard. My dear friends, you must believe me. There is a reason why Yahuwah has called me to touch on this topic at least 3 times in the past year. It was to prepare you for the next moment of truth, for a valley of decisions is drawing near. Heretofore, I recommend, don't be deceived into disregarding any fraction of Yahuwah's will. Stand up for what you know is right. And while the majority are blinded and dying still, you will increase your spiritual sight. Hallelujah. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 502, The Spiritual Disease of Ignorance, Part 2. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 503, The Spiritual Disease of Ignorance, Part 3. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.